Welcome back, lovely allies and ally accomplices and all those different things. Okay, in this interview, we are hopping on a call with Jess Robson. Jess, hello, my friend. We actually share a town, just so y'all know, which is lovely because we can grab a coffee and a donut at any old time. So let's just jump right into this. We're going to talk about emotional intelligence. We're going to talk about pattern interruption, and we're going to talk about communication as it relates to allyship and stepping into action. So Jess, give us a little tour of who you is and what you do.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Nadi. I'm stoked to be chatting with you today. My name is Jess Robson. I am a settler here in Squamish, which is the traditional and unceded territory of the Squamish people. Originally from Calgary, Alberta. I've been on the west coast of Canada for about 16 or 17 years now, and my work is really in the world of helping people become more in touch with and in tune with who they truly are, and then bring that person up and out and learn to express themselves in the most honest, true, authentic, fill in the word here way possible. I worked for the first 8 and a bit years of my freelance career was in copywriting. So I did a lot of brand communications for small businesses and entrepreneurs with a true focus on helping people move past trendy language and get into the words that express them, their business, their values, the value they bring to the world in the most honest way possible. And I am transitioning that writing business more so into the space of coaching with a focus on emotional intelligence. But really, that's just the foundation for everything to grow off of, because in my perspective, when we know ourselves more deeply, we have access to more empathy for other people, also for ourselves, and we can more courageously bring who we really are up and out to the surface with less doubt, more confidence, and just more you.
Oh my God, all those things. And then you chime that right in, like we bumper this right up against gender discrimination and the work of allyship to step into action. You can feel that connection there of being like, because it's the thing is when it comes to, like interrupting patterns or reducing harm or whatever language we want to use around active allyship, it has to come from a place of authenticity. And we were talking about this in the interview with Nix had brought up a really beautiful way to support people is just through compliments. Like just when you see somebody who doesn't fit, that's the wrong language, but who is just expressing themselves authentically outside the boring binary of gender, the ability to like authentically compliment somebody can, and they even went so far to say that it was like that it can be a form of suicide prevention. Like that's the role that communication can really play in this. So when I think of EQ, I think of it in the terms of being, the ability to let your emotions come through you without controlling you.
Yeah,
What would
exactly how I describe it. I always say,
is it
the ability to work with your emotions as opposed to getting worked by them.
Mm-hmm. 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 So when we put that in the context of a situation comes up, like if we were to case study it and use what happened with my son as an example, right? At the bus, and the bus driver wouldn't let my son on because the name on the ticket was a boy's name, and the bus driver looked at Seb and said, "You're not a boy." So in a situation like that, as somebody, I know, right? Deep breaths around that, seeing a kind of friction happen, emotions are bubbling up. Let's say you as an ally did witness, you saw the body language on my son, you saw that seemed to be some kind of interaction happening that was a bit of friction to it. When we put that into the context of emotional intelligence, what's kind of coming up for people and how can they move through what might be coming up in a situation like that?
Mm-hmm. So I have many thoughts and feelings about that. I am letting them bubble. So in any situation, we can use the one with Seb as a case study, and we'll kind of hold that one as the situation we're considering while I talk through what we need to tap into in those moments. In any situation, And in the realm of the practice of EQ that I facilitate and apply in inside conversations, is there's a bunch of different skills that we're learning to hone over time. One of them is an important one, emotional self-awareness. I see it as really the keystone of all of our ability to practice and apply emotional intelligence across our lives. So inside emotional self-awareness, it's not only having a relationship and an understanding of our different feelings and emotions. And let me say there are probably 10 times the number of feelings and emotions that we can actually experience than most people think.
Yeah.
Most people think that we're limited to between like 10 and 30 emotions when there's 150 plus.
Right. And they could just like
They cycle so freaking fast. You can experience multiple and divergent emotions at the same time. And that is very human, very normal, very natural. And it's not only the ability to feel, sort through, and understand what you're feeling in a moment, but then also understand the impact of your emotional expression on other people. So it's a two-parter there, right? It's what am I feeling, but then how do I know that expresses and impacts the people around me? Okay. The other one is impulse control. And so this is kind of on the more like, let's call it strategic skills side of the emotional intelligence. That was cattail.
I love it.
Doug is joining our lesson today. Impulse control is more on the, like, as we start working our way through the emotional intelligence skills, this is where we start to get more into like externally expressed skills and strategies, because some of them are more internal, some of them are more external, some of them are interpersonal, right? And on the impulse control side of things, that's our ability to, when we talk about working with our emotions versus being worked by them, when we're low on impulse control, that's where we feel something and we act. And in certain cases, we understand that that's necessary in cases of emergency, right?
Yeah.
Some CEOs will actually say how that's one of the most important skills that they have, because it's their responsibility to take care of their business, their people, et cetera, to be able to move that fast and trust instinct and intuition. But instinct and intuition are very different from an emotional reaction. Right?
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I'm with you.
So I know I'm moving kind of quick.
No, but that's the point of this. It was like to be punchy and like, and just for attendees, like as I said at the beginning, the idea with all of these interviews is we're going to pick you up, we're going to give you the information, and we're going to let you down. So anything that Jess is bringing up, you're taking notes. You know, you've got the feedback form there. If something really triggers something and hits you, and you want to discuss it further, use it, and we can continue this conversation. But that's the point of this, Jess, is to kind of like get the information out there. So.
Yeah. So in that impulse control space, the low impulse control is where we have a feeling and then we just fire off. The other end of it that we also have to be responsible about is when we get too restrictive and we don't allow ourselves to act. For some people, myself, that can affect my ability to just be spontaneous sometimes. But in the other side of it, and when we think about it from an allyship perspective, much like we're talking about in these sessions, is that can also be the withholding. That can be where we won't let ourselves take an action for maybe fear of doing it wrong, or take an action because we're waiting for someone else to do it, or we think someone else might be more appropriately set up to do it, or we're just afraid, right?
Yes.
All those different, and that's another emotion playing into that other, feeling of frustration or anger or empathy that we're feeling for someone, where we want to act, but then we're held back by a deeper feeling. And something that I want to surface in this, like a whole other conversation you and I could end up having in this space in particular, is the understanding that our emotional reactions and the feelings that we have in certain situations, they are different for each different person. A lot of the time can be informed by past traumas or past experiences in our lives. And they can be so intense for some people that they can be paralyzing, right? Or they can happen so quickly, and someone can have such an intense reaction outwardly so fast, they don't even know they're doing it.
Yeah, this makes me think of my daughter who's autistic.
Right.
So
Yeah.
emotional intelligence at a big, if you look at it with a big bright light, there's a lot of ableist language that happens inside emotional intelligence. You and I have talked about this, the flaws of its development and who created it and who it was created for, kind of thing. Because from the disability lens, there's a lot of pieces of emotional intelligence that are inaccessible, right? Because sometimes the instinct might be there, the impulse control isn't, the pause is there, and then all these emotions are spinning up around, and it's like, what's accessible at that point? It's freeze.
Yeah.
It is more in alignment with the capability in that stage.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. So every person's journey, access to understanding of relationship with their own emotions is going to be different based on our own humanity,
Yeah.
our own experience, right? Past, present, capabilities, capacities, all the different pieces there. So I'm trying not to get too far away from the example.
No, yeah. Well, this is what I'm thinking of, in the sense, then this is what just came through for me, is how challenging it is to interrupt the pattern when discrimination is happening and remain authentic.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And because, yes, there's risk. And this is like a big conversation that we're having in this, like, effective allyship requires risk
Mm-hmm.
to actually step into a place and interrupt. So, like, in the interview with Matthew, we were talking about instinct.
Mm-hmm.
Like, at a humanity level, instinct kicks in that something's not right. So the discrimination, the situation, whatever's happening in the pattern we're trying to interrupt doesn't necessarily have to be entirely reflective of a gender discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
Something's not right, and instinct is kicking in that moment. So emotional intelligence, all these emotions are spinning, instinct is kicking in, there's an impulse control that's either firing or throwing you into like a fight or flight, depending on your yeah, right. So how are we processing through this then to actually interrupt the pattern? So, and I'll use like what Matthew and I were talking about was this sense of, sometimes it's just tapping into the humanity, and it's enough to not, you don't even have to overthink it. Just center the person being harmed and do what you can to remove them from it. But what emotion, like, what's coming up in that pattern or interruption too,
Yep. Yeah. I much like I so inside the pattern interruption piece of it, one tool that was passed to me, and it wasn't necessarily contextualized in the allyship space when I got taught this, but I think it really does apply, and we can play with it a little bit. But it's this idea of the pause and wait, right? So we can interrupt our patterns with a pause, because if anyone's the type of person who they see something happening and they jump right in and they want to be the protector, and it can sometimes not always go the way they intend it to, because
right.
Intentions and impact sometimes don't line up.
Well, and this comes down to, who are you centering?
Also that.
So in that moment, are you centering the person doing harm, or are you centering your own sense of being a hero?
Yeah, that's that. If it's a white person, the white savior aspect of it, or places that maybe are not our spaces to jump into. So the pause is the interruption. In my perspective, breaking down the pattern lies in the wait, WAIT. So pause and wait, and the wait is an acronym where the W is why, WHY, the A is am. The I stands for I, and the T is for talking. Why am I talking?
Oh, right?
Yeah. And when I got that one, I was like, And
why am I talking?
Right.
Yeah.
That for me is that where we can change or transform the pattern that we might have. I think the pause is the pause interrupts things, which is great. And if we're not necessarily taking the time to have, and when I say time, I'm talking about microseconds in certain situations.
Yeah.
This is also a reflective piece after something, because that's a healthy practice as well. And something that I like to apply to communication coaching, whether that's, inside business related comms for someone where things went sideways, or for someone that I'm coaching individually, is if people break down a communication event for themselves, after the fact, when it didn't go the way they wanted to, or even when it did, that's where they can start to see where there are developmental opportunities inside how they addressed it.
Self-reflection. Yep.
And so that weight, that why am I talking piece, that can be like an in the moment kind of pulse check with ourselves for checking ourselves against a white savior complex, that heroism, that thinking that not that we necessarily have to be the one, but just even doing that little double check, you know? And in this case of the bus, if there was someone that witnessed that and took that second to pause, witness the situation, ask the why am I talking, to check against where's this coming from, who is this for, how, like, who do I want to be in this situation?
That's
See
it.
no one else is acting.
Yes.
Then step in from a values aligned, almost like nervous system integrated kind of place. And I'm not saying you're necessarily going to be a cool cucumber, because I know I would be shaking in that moment. My nervous system would be jacked up out of the fear that's coursing through my body for what that's going to mean for me, for what that person might say back for me, for someone who's struggled with like confrontational conversations in the past, or constructive conversations, however you want to categorize that. It doesn't mean that you're not going to still be scared, but it's acting anyways in those moments when you know it's the right thing for you to do in that situation, because you've checked against that weight.
Oh, can we just let that land? It doesn't mean you're not going to be scared, right? And that's the thing with allyship is, and this is like when Matthew and I were talking, in the sense of it being a social construct that needs to be removed. Using your humanity to protect somebody else doesn't mean you're not going to be scared. Like, these emotions are still going to come up. Like, you're still going to be feeling and firing and freaking out, you know, and maybe you are the personality who's cool as a cucumber in a moment like that, you know, but what are you going to be like 5, 10, 15 minutes the day after, whatever? Like, it's all going to keep churning. And I think that's a really helpful reflection through the lens of allyship, is that being an effective ally doesn't mean you've conquered this sense of fear or this sense of concern or any of the you know, relatively negative side effects of being an ally, of taking the risk. You know, it's still going to be there. I think that's a really helpful place to kind of sit with and be like, okay, yeah, and you may not do it right, you know, right. Like you define it in whatever context you want, but you may not. I love this concept of weight. You know, I love that placement. If that's all it is in a moment for an ally to see something, to let their intuition connect to something, to impulse control through it, to take that pause, and then to wait, is it just enough of a fraction of time to be like, okay, what direction do I go with this? And this really does pin against that sense as well of someone else will do it, someone else will speak up.
Yeah.
Because I think that part of what happens in you know, the instinct, the impulse, is this pause moment of like, someone else is going to get involved, right? Like somebody else is seeing this. And Nick's talked about this, like when they were teaching a class and someone had misgendered them in the class, nobody said anything, even though it was perfectly clear that they'd been misgendered in the class. You know, it was this, someone else is going to say something, right? And then nobody says anything.
No.
And that's the zone we're trying to shake out of allyship.
Yeah. And I think like, and it's interesting to consider the even not difference, but just like the many different avenues, platforms, access points we have to these conversations or these situations, right? Because of how much time our lives are spent online.
Yeah.
Situations that happen offline, and how frequently we're exposed to microaggressions, macroaggressions against any form of marginalized person or group so frequently, and how these opportunities for us to act in alignment with those values that we have come up so many times every single day. And from the in-person or the things that happen when we're out in the world to things that we see online, you know, I remember a certain time where like all you would see were keyboard warriors all the time in comments and or like in the comments on any kind of Instagram post, Twitter, Facebook, all the different
All
platforms.
over the place. Yeah.
And again, intention and impact, could assume that the intention came from a good place, but you could also feel in some of the comments how fear-laden they were for not saying the right thing or not saying something or not acknowledging what needed to be acknowledged. Do you know what I mean?
Yep, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think about some of the ways that some of my choices that I've made, because I'm only going to speak from not generalize things, in this space of changing a pattern for myself, was choosing to, still in these online spaces, go into a personal one-on-one DM conversation with someone as opposed to publicly comment and speak honestly from the heart, and then also take the opportunity to offer a piece of information that could be supportive for that person, having a more inclusive, a more kind, a more generous way of communicating in the world.
Yeah.
And in part of me, like in sitting here, I'm kind of like, there's that little bit of that shame voice that I can hear in the back saying like, oh, does it need to be private, Jess? Is that the safer way to do it?
Right. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Maybe in some people's perspective, maybe. For me, a personal approach, the one-on-one, has always been the way that I've found myself to be the most real way of being me. One-on-one relationships are the way that they're life force, they're how I thrive.
Yeah.
And it still feels risky inside one-on-one relationships or inside safe one-on-one containers to say to someone, that's not cool.
Yeah.
And here's why. And I know you, and I know you to be a kind, loving, generous, caring person. And if you're keen to take what you do and take it to that level where there's more people who feel more included more frequently, then like, here's the offer. From shifting one word to taking a new perspective, to trying on this new way of looking at things, to reading this one article, or let me introduce you to this rad person doing this interesting thing in the world that could actually expand something for you, then if that's going to make a change for them, I'm trusting that it will. It could also compromise that relationship or compromise their, and I don't know.
Yeah, but that's the risk.
That's the
That's
risk.
You calculating it and being intentional to interrupt the pattern.
Yeah.
To offer whatever outcome it ends up being. And an example I'll give of that is, and I talked about this in Nick's interview potentially, but was someone in my community was using the language of what is your preferred pronoun, which is just cringe and ick. And I had I did, interrupt the pattern, engage private, in a DM. I didn't do it on their reel where they had it or anything. I took it into a DM, engaged in the conversation. It flared up fragility. It flared, they unsubscribed from my mailing list. They, like all these different things happened. That was their reaction. That's outside of our control. So I really want to leave it on this note then, when we think about that pattern interruption and the emotional intelligence and stepping into active allyship, is, I hope a takeaway that people can gather from this is there's no cookie cutter approach to it. And it really is dependent on your own narrative and how you are going to choose to navigate the situation. And there is no one way to do this, right? That's a supremacy culture thing, one right way. So there's no one right way to do this. And if you're coming from a background of trauma where you struggle with conflict or whatever it might be, taking it into a private conversation is what you need to do. And there is no right way. You don't have, in a situation using my son as an example, nobody has to yell at the bus driver to interrupt the pattern. you know, to center my son, to remove him from the situation. And it could be as easy as being like, oh, hey, like just whatever it needs to be, like remove him from it enough so that my son could have had a conversation with somebody outside the realm, who this person could have then maybe gone in and said, he's transgender, you know, and been able to do exactly what my son couldn't. And that could have been enough. It would have been enough, let's say it like that. So there is no one right way to do this. It's enough I love this, if we just leave allies with the sense, the tools. Your instinct flares up. What's the impulse control to kind of like, whoa, like regulate what's going on in there. Pause within yourself. Practice, pause, and wait. Why am I talking is enough to go, this is why I'm talking. Nobody else is doing anything. What am I going to do? You know, and doing it in your own way.
Yeah. And knowing and understanding that we can't control how anyone receives what we say. We can only be responsible for our end of the communication. Yeah. And if we're coming from a place of that, like, true values alignment, I want to say generosity, I want to say kindness, I want to say, if that's where it's coming from, and you know that it's true for you, and it can be delivered in a way that is as generous as possible, and is as that takes the whole situation into account as much as possible, that decenters your fear or your frustration or your anger or your hurt or whatever it is that's there, and really centers the person that's being harmed, then whatever comes, it's going to be another one of those moments of pause and wait, and it will roll.
It's a rinse and repeat, isn't it? Pause, wait, rinse and repeat as much as you need.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. We could talk for ages about this. This has been so helpful. And I can see where this is going to tie into the interview with Johnny. We're talking about de-escalation specifically. So I can see how that's going to tie in. So that interview is coming next. Cool. Jess, thank you so much for being here and sharing your love and your light and your expertise with us. I really appreciate it. Y'all, you can find Jess, contact information, LinkedIn, all website, all that stuff, in around anywhere where you're watching these recordings, or whether you're here live with us. And look out for, Jess has got a book or two coming too. Because I know you do. So there's like a little piece. So look out for that. Thanks, pal, for being here. I really, really appreciate it.
Anytime.